So, The Last Jedi is out, and despite what appears to be critical acclaim, it's been met with its fair share of criticism, especially from dedicated Star Wars fans. Now, I'm not going to go into all that because, frankly, it's been talked about ad nauseum already, and to a far greater extent than I could or would want to. What I will say is that I find The Last Jedi fascinating for how much of a mixed bag it is. For everything it does right, it does something wrong. While the stuff with Rey, Kylo Ren, and Luke are all pretty good, it never gets to resonate because it constantly cross-cuts to stuff you don't care about. There are too many characters and too many subplots, too much misplaced humor that detracts from the drama, and the narrative goes in directions you don't expect, and not necessarily in a good way. The result is a bloated mess of a movie with great sequences and interesting ideas. It tries to do so many things and service everyone that it never takes the time to excel at anything. There is a genuinely compelling and more focused movie underneath all the fat, and it's a shame there's just so much of it. But thinking about the problems of The Last Jedi got me thinking about the overall problems with the sequel trilogy in general. One of the biggest criticisms of The Last Jedi is how it disposes so much of the setup established in The Force Awakens. Plot points such as the mystery of Rey's parents and characters such as Snoke are casually discarded, and this upset a lot of people who were expecting something more meaningful. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if that setup wasn't already incredibly vague and sloppy. One of the issues that plagues The Force Awakens that even those who love that film have to concede is that the world building is abysmal. If you hold the story of The Force Awakens under a microscope, you'll quickly realize that there is no context provided for why anything is happening. Take the concept of the First Order, for instance. We are told in the opening crawl that they were born from the ashes of the Empire. Okay, I get that on a conceptual level, but what does that mean? In terms of aesthetic and narrative purpose, they are essentially just a new empire, even down to the fact that they are led by an old Sith master. But how they came about after the Empire's fall in Return of the Jedi is never addressed. What is their goal? Who is Snoke? Where did he come from? And why is he so powerful? And what about the New Republic? How come despite being a re-established official governing power, do they seem like the underdog in this story? Adding to this confusion is how the Republic's response to the First Order is called the Resistance. Why is it called the Resistance? Does the Republic not have an established army of some kind? We never even get to see the Republic except for a brief instant before they get vaporized by Starkiller Base, and we are never even told what this planet is or why it's important. The film never addresses or even hints to the answers to these questions, which is detrimental to the world building, which is essential to getting an audience to become invested in what is going on. Now compare this to the original Star Wars. The first scene establishes that there is an evil empire and that there are good guy rebels opposing it. But as the story goes on, Luke, who acts as a point of view for the audience, learns that before the Empire there was a republic, and that a mystical order of knights called the Jedi served and protected that republic. We learn that Luke's father was a Jedi and was killed by Darth Vader, a Jedi who turned to the dark side. In just one small scene, the backstory of this universe is established and we understand its dynamics. The Force Awakens never stops to do this. It just assumes you've seen the original Star Wars and thus assumes you already know what is going on. Instead of coming up with something original, it just reuses the classic iconography everyone associates with Star Wars but never justifies it. Instead, it lazily invents another all-powerful and unstoppable empire and reduces the New Republic into a victim with no explanation of how any of this came about, simply because that is the dynamic the audience is most familiar with. It's nostalgia without reason, maintaining the status quo despite Return of the Jedi's unambiguously conclusive ending. One of the few things the film does establish, however, is a backstory about how Snoke tempted Han and Leia's son Ben to the dark side, and how that played into the destruction of Luke's Jedi temple. Sure, it's broadly sketched, but it's the deepest The Force Awakens gets to setting up a narrative and investing you into the larger story. So then, it is understandable why so many expected The Last Jedi to develop what little was established, which explains why so many were annoyed by how the film callously discards it. Yes, Snoke was an original carbon copy of Emperor Palpatine, there's no denying that, and that was one of the many sins of The Force Awakens, but The Last Jedi had a chance to make the character more than just a Palpatine clone. It had the chance to dive deeper into the character, show us how he came into contact with Ben, show us his connection to Luke, and maybe even hint at his role prior to the First Order. There was a chance to take him beyond what little was done in The Force Awakens and give us more history of this new version of Star Wars. But instead, director Rian Johnson decided to kill him. While certainly unexpected, that doesn't make it a good choice. In fact, it's a terrible choice, because now you've rendered what precious little was established in The Force Awakens completely moot. And the same can be said of the revelation regarding Rey's parents. It's not that both of these dramatic turns are necessarily bad, it's that they don't build off what was set up in The Force Awakens, and even worse, offer nothing in return. Basically, while The Force Awakens did a poor job of setting things up, The Last Jedi does a poor poor job of developing it further into a cohesive narrative. It topples everything over without building anything substantive in its place. The Empire Strikes Back did a similar thing, revealing that Darth Vader had not killed Anakin Skywalker, but in fact was Anakin Skywalker. But the difference is that the original film didn't go out of its way to set up this revelation like The Force Awakens did. Through Rey's connection to the Force and Luke's lightsaber, the film strongly implies a deeper mystery to Rey's character, which The Last Jedi then abandons and contradicts. This is not the same as Empire, which merely altered a minor element of the backstory set up in the original for dramatic effect in a complementary way. So yes, while both trilogies were written on a whim, the sequel trilogy more obviously contradicts itself, and thus more obviously shows that it doesn't have a plan, resulting in plot holes and inconsistencies. Are we ever going to find out how Maz Kanata wound up with Luke's lightsaber? Somehow I doubt it, but who knows, maybe J.J. Abrams will address it in episode 9. Decisions like the killing off of Snoke before developing him at all makes the character even more one-dimensional, and destroys what little context there was to root the audience in the story. A lot of stuff happens in The Last Jedi, and characters do have arcs, but there's no clear dramatic reason as to why any of it is happening. The First Order is evil because they are the bad guys, and the Resistance is good because they are the good guys. Sure, the original trilogy was just as simplistic, but it had a historical context surrounding it, which gave it dramatic stakes. The only context we have in the sequel trilogy comes from our knowledge of the original trilogy. Aside from that, there is no sense of history, no sense of place, no sense of time. The world feels insular. I honestly can't imagine watching these new films with zero knowledge of the past films. It would be a confusing nightmare. So without any context as to why things are happening, why should I care about what happens in episode 9? The goal is to defeat the bad guys. Okay, so what? That was done already in Return of the Jedi, and according to the sequel trilogy, that was unsuccessful. I think the most unsettling thing about The Last Jedi is that it essentially concludes with a blank slate, with no context to root anything with meaning. Disney can now do whatever they want. They have the good guys and the bad guys all set up, and the connection to the original trilogy is pretty much burned at this point. Even Luke says in his final moments that the war is just beginning, which should tell you everything you need to know about Disney's plans for Star Wars going forward. The days of this being an epic saga with a beginning and an end are over. Of course, we knew this would be the case as soon as Disney got their greedy little mouse paws on it, but it's now truly settling in. Disney can make as many Star Wars episodes as they want now, because there will always be an empire and a band of rebels to resist it, and it won't matter why they're fighting or what they're fighting for is. It's Star Wars, and the fight against the empire will go on until the end of time, or until it stops being profitable.